Welcome to the Be Here Now Guest Podcast. This series features a collection of teachings and conversations centered around mindfulness, spiritual growth, and living a life in balance. Each week, our diverse network of guest teachers and hosts offer up wisdom and practices from a different spiritual path and perspective. If you would like to support this podcast, please visit BeHereNowNetwork.com/donate.
Hi, everyone. Just taking a moment to let people connect. Hi. Welcome. So just invite everyone to take a couple of breaths as we land and settle together in community. Feel your body, feel your breath, feel your feet. Just be here in this moment together. I see some familiar faces. It's great to see you. And I'm curious if anyone is here for the very first time. Let's see if I can say it. Yes. Oh, wonderful. All right. So invite you to start to build community by saying hi in the chat. You are muted for now. Later, we'll have an opportunity where we get to talk to each other and ask questions, and you'll be able to unmute. And I know that there are so many things that pull for our attention these days. And so it truly is a gift that you have chosen to pause and be here and explore this intersection of spirituality and psychedelics and service and science and so much more. So we're all here as explorers. And we created the Explorers Club about a year ago with the intention of creating a space where we could create community, where we could dive deeper into sort of uncovering these non-ordinary states and how they wake us up. And the spirit of these gatherings really are following in Ram Dass's lineage of loving awareness, of the willingness to look deeper, to stay curious, to open our hearts again and again and again, and to move beyond who we think we are. And probably everyone here, but just in case, knows that it was psychedelics that woke up Richard Alpert. And then he couldn't make sense of it. And he wanted to figure out how to live in that state more. And so he traveled east and he explored mystical traditions and techniques of meditation and devotion and service. And he became Ram Dass. And then he spent the next 40 plus years living into what those awakenings had originally shown him. We call this the Explorers Club because when the government was trying to reclassify LSD, Ram Dass was like, hey, why don't we just have like a regulatory, like the FAA? We can have an inner flight school, is what he said. And then he would refer to all of his colleagues as the old Explorers Club that could be a part of this. And so we decided to follow in those footsteps and call this the Explorers Club. And I know some of you came to Ram Dass through psychedelics, and some of you came to psychedelics through Ram Dass, and some of you find non-ordinary states in a lot of different ways. And all of us are welcome. We're just here to listen and show up with compassion and plant seeds of awareness and live into these teachings. And so tonight, I'm really excited. We're being joined by someone who has tended those seeds really beautifully. So Joshua White is the founder of Fireside Project, and it's the world's first psychedelic peer support line. And we were talking earlier that a lot of this work actually has threads of Ram Dass in it. And so tonight we'll be talking about being a loving rock in the storm. And he's created this incredible space and community where anyone can find calm and connection and compassion and support during and after psychedelic journeys. So tonight we'll learn more from Joshua, more about Fireside, more about being a loving rock. And just because some of you are new, we have 90 minutes together. In the first hour, we'll just have interview. Eventually, we'll open it up for you all to ask your questions. And then the last 30 minutes is where we learn from each other, where we go into breakout rooms to share our stories and make those deeper connections. And so, for some, that's exciting. For some, that's nerve-wracking. But I hope all of you will join because that's where the community really builds. So there's my little opening spiel. Thanks for sitting with it. And with that, let's welcome Joshua. Thanks so much for being with us and sharing.
Thank you for inviting me. It's such a profound honor to be here with you.
Lovely, lovely. So I would love for you to start by just sharing some of your own journey. What brought you into this field of psychedelics and psychedelic support?
Yeah, it's really interesting because when I was preparing to chat with you today, I knew I would be talking about how Ram Dass kind of influenced my journey. And I knew when you asked me, well, of course, he played a significant role. But as I was like walking through the various phases of my life, I was just so profoundly struck by how at every single critical juncture, Ram Dass's wisdom helped to light the way for me and create a container for me to understand my experiences. And so, not totally unlike Ram Dass, I grew up in a sort of upper middle class Jewish home, feeling profoundly alienated from the Jewish religion and from kind of a more conventional life. Not unlike Ram Dass, I pursued a career that, I felt like I should, quote unquote, pursue. So I became a lawyer. And very, very, very soon after I became a lawyer, during my first job working for the federal government, I started to realize that probably this wasn't the right track for me. And that was I started going to yoga. And I remember my yoga teacher handed me Be Here Now, which those 3 words a year or so later became my first of several dozen tattoos. And I think that the experience of reading that book, and I remember the first kind of I think most powerful insight that Ram Dass provided me is that I'm not my thoughts, and I had just been tormented as a person throughout my life. I had a very, very challenging childhood and parental situation of just being tormented by the notion that there must be something wrong with me to be having such profound self-hatred and self-loathing and all of these other thoughts that felt so profoundly depleting. And so the notion that I was loving awareness and that I could be the observer of my thoughts, I think really set me down this path. And it was very self-serving. I was like, oh my God, if I can create space between this point of perception and these horrible thoughts and just observe them, then I don't have to feel those thoughts in the same way. So that really set me out on a path of yoga and meditation. I had never tried psychedelics at that point, but I think that Ram Dass's experience encountering Maharaji and having these sort of magical experiences with him, I think, and of course, all of the impact that LSD and other psychedelics had on him really showed me that these substances really could be responsible tools for profound inner work. And so by the time I came to psychedelics, which was a couple of years later, I was already thinking about them as these powerful opportunities to do really deep work. And plus, I'd always had this sense that there was just magic in the world, that there was more to this world. There were sparkles just kind of on the edge of our periphery. And there was something about reading about Ram Dass's encounters with Maharaji, how Maharaji knew upon meeting Ram Dass in those first moments that he had just been thinking about his mother who had passed away, and that she had died from stomach problems and spleen issues in particular, that it just sort of lit something up inside of me. And so I continued on a path of psychotherapy and psychedelics, and my interest in both of those kind of continued to explode. and one of the things I loved so much about Ram Dass was his idea that, service is the highest form of integration, that unless you're serving others, unless you're really asking yourself, how deeply can I serve others based on the gifts that I have, there's still far more work to do. And, I love hearing about Ram Dass's encounters with Maharaji, where, he would describe how people would come to Maharaji and Maharaji would get a sense for who they are and what their gifts might be, and then assign them their work. And so for me, from the very beginning, thanks to that really powerful insight, the question that I was asking myself was, okay, well, how can I continue to be of service? I was of service in my job as a lawyer working for the city of San Francisco for many years. But when I started taking psychedelics, I really began to ask myself, what can I do to serve others in the most profound way?
So tell us about that. How did that weave into this project that is so brilliant now, the Fireside Project?
Yeah. So, I became convinced that I wanted to become a psychedelic therapist. And a friend said to me, well, if you're going to leave your career as a lawyer to provide psychedelic support, you should see if you actually like doing it. And so I started volunteering at the Zendo Project, providing in-person support at festivals. But then the most transformative experience was volunteering on a hotline in San Francisco for parents with young kids. The idea in that particular hotline is parents can call us to receive support in the moment, so they hopefully don't do something that they're going to regret. So they're very, very intense calls. And, I think it became very clear to me very early on that the quality of my presence is what is going to help provide that sense of groundedness for our callers. And with that, I remembered a gorgeous poem that Ram Dass had written with, I think it's Mirabai Bush, on guidelines how to be a loving rock. And one of the things that I just think is so genius about Ram Dass was just his ability to express concepts in the most perfect pearls of wisdom. And so I would ask myself when I was on that support line, well, how can I be a loving rock? That all of this work, active listening, all of these different techniques, really all it boils down to is how to be a loving rock. And so I volunteered on that support line for about 7 years, and then the pandemic rolled around. I was solo quarantining, which was a miserable experience. Call volume on that parental abuse hotline was absolutely through the roof. You can imagine what types of calls we were getting, and then also psychedelics were exploding. MDMA was continuing to advance through the phase 3 clinical trial process. Ketamine was exploding, and so really, I kind of came back to that basic question of how can I be most profoundly of service to the psychedelic field. And one thing that LSD has taught me is just think as big as possible, that any self-limiting belief that I have is absolutely wrong, or at the very least, I should assume that it's wrong. And so I thought to myself, well, I think that the way that I can be of service is trying to help psychedelics realize their full potential in the world. And the way that I think I can help do that is to make sure that everyone in the world has unlimited free access to psychedelic support. Starting with the United States. And so Fireside Project, the nonprofit that I started, was born out of that idea. And I think even the name Fireside Project sort of, I think has echoes of the idea of being a loving rock. Because when we were thinking of what we wanted the name of this psychedelic support line to be, we sort of asked, well, how do we want people to feel when they're reaching out to us? And, the answer was, well, we want people to feel a sense of welcomeness and connection and safety and warmth. And of course, what arose was, well, we want people to feel like they're sitting beside the fire. I think part of what's so beautiful about that imagery of the fireside is that it is non-hierarchical, that when we're with each other by the fire, it is this practice of non-hierarchical witness, of simply being with someone for all that arises. And everything sort of flowed from there. We launched about 5 years ago. We've had 30,000 or so conversations, and it's continued to grow and evolve. We've trained over 500 practitioners, and Jackie, I know we were talking. I'll stop there for a minute.
No, this is great. Keep going. Because what that was my question was, so first of all, I love that. Think as big as possible. I also want to see the Be Here Now tattoo if it's possible. But this idea of loving presence, of being a rock and training fire, like, first of all, I have 2 questions, but first I'll start with, how do you train that with people? How does that come forward? How do you get your 500 coaches to know how to do that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, so one is we're lucky to have a pretty big pool of candidates, and so we can pick from people who already have, some experience. But, what's really interesting is we get a lot of people who apply with lots of letters after their last name. And sometimes there can be tension between the number of letters you have after your name and the degree to which you're willing to just be humbly with someone with that attitude of witness and loving rockness, instead of a desire to fix the person or to lead them towards a destination that you think is right. So really what we ask ourselves during the interview process is a very simple question, which is, would I want this person to be sitting for me or the person I love most in the world during a psychedelic experience? And, the answer kind of, I think, always comes back to presence, that beautiful, ineffable quality that you can sense from very early on. And I also love the fact that that to be fully present really requires profound inner work in a way that I think is kind of counterintuitive. What's so hard about just being present for someone? Well, there's a lot that can be hard about it. I mean, for one thing, if the emotions that are arising for the person that you're supporting are emotions that you yourself have not processed, either consciously or unconsciously, then you can't be fully present, and there's a risk of even harming the person. A phrase that I learned from a mentor of mine when I was learning active listening is, what we can't acknowledge is what we defend against. And it took me a moment to kind of understand what that means, but I think
say it one more time. What we can't acknowledge
is what we defend against. And so I think that if one hasn't done their own inner work and someone is coming to us with material that triggers unprocessed material within us, there may be a range of ways that we react to it that may not welcome that emotion in the person who we're supporting. And so I think to be a loving rock in my experience is this process of cultivating my own deep awareness of my own triggers. I guess in the world of psychotherapy, it could be called like transference and countertransference.
And the Ram Dass, because many of us here probably listen to him all the time, his quotes come into my head all of in perfect opportunities. And 2 came up as you were talking about that. And one was, the best thing I can do for you is to work on myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then the other is this, and I use it all the time. How do I become an environment so that when another person is ready, they can come up for air. And I feel like that's some of the, some of the work is just to be that loving space, that loving awareness, without putting our stuff on people.
Yeah, absolutely. And it takes a lifetime. I mean, I'm still have so much work that I need to do. But to be able to identify what our stuff is and do the work beforehand. And then I think once that's happened, then when someone, presents and is seeking support, then you can see how the alchemical work that you've done directly translates to your ability to support that person.
So there's this idea we were talking about earlier of our own personal awakening through psychedelics and non-ordinary states, and the piece of healing from trauma, the piece of remembering our wholeness. And then we didn't talk about this much, but the piece of how do we take that back into the world? And so I'm curious if you want to talk a little bit about any aspect of the trauma, the wholeness, the service piece, whatever feels most alive for you.
Yeah, sure. In this moment, what comes up for me is, I remember several years ago, I was at a multi-day ayahuasca retreat, and I was asking a fellow journeyer, does all of this talk about healing just kind of annoy you sometimes? How there's just this sort of endless seeking for, I need more healing, I need more healing, I need more healing. Almost like we try to accumulate healing like it's a commodity in a sense. Does that strike you as wrong? And, and what he said was really interesting. He's like, there's this sort of paradox where we can be whole, and we can also seek to heal. And that idea of connecting to my own wholeness, that I can do that, that I'm not broken, but that I can connect. I can both be not broken and have a lot of work to do, but seeing myself as a person who is enough has been, I think, is like quite powerful for me. And a word that I've been coming back to a lot lately is a Hebrew word, dayenu, which means enough. It's a song that's sung in the Passover Seder, and it's been really profound for me lately because I think enough is another way of saying that each moment, each person is perfect as it is. And there's like this sense of gratitude that can come from realizing that. And to pursue healing from a place of enoughness is a radically different process than to pursue it from a place of emptiness and brokenness. And I think, like, to your question, I think that my own sense is that if one sees themselves as profoundly broken, then it becomes harder or it feels harder to show up in service of others. How can what do I really have to offer another if I perceive myself as shattered? But if I can connect with my own sense of enoughness, then that feels like a more solid and true place from which to be in service of others and supporting others. I don't know if that...
It makes a ton of sense. It just brought something to mind that I haven't thought of in a long time. And it actually comes from a 12-step model, which is like one of the first things you do is you start showing up and making the coffee and serving and being a part of it. And I think part of it is that just to remember that you have something to offer, that there is a sense of wholeness, that we have value. And it reminds me, as I said earlier, what this idea of the deficiency models that we're so trained in. There's a lecture Ram Dass talks about love going right through us. He says the words like bad Chinese food. because we're so stuck in our deficiency models. And I think one of the brilliant things about psychedelics is they wake us up out of that. There's this like break in the habitual thought patterns of who we think we are. And we're like, oh, wait, I'm so much more than that. And then when we come back, are we able to live from that place, maybe just a little bit more each time? Or if we come back from our meditation or our breath work or wherever we're getting that sense where we can move beyond the I'm broken. And yes, I can still have work to do. I mean, Ram Dass talked about how, he still had all of his same neuroses. They just didn't grab him as much, right? It's not like they all went away. It's not like we're trying to get rid of everything. It's just to be more human with ourselves, to be more compassionate with ourselves.
Right. It feels like what's shifted for me over time is the relationship to my neuroses. That like instead of that I think I can see my neuroses more as like amusing efforts that I put in place years ago to try to protect me, but I'm safe now, and so I can sort of embrace them and see them as, I think, well-intentioned parts of me rather than saboteurs.
It's often like, oh, sweetheart, you're trying so hard with those little defenses,
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. And so you mentioned a little bit about your background in Judaism. And we had talked a little bit before we started about how that's sort of circling back around, similar maybe to Ram Dass in some ways. So I'm curious if you would talk more about that.
Sure. Yeah. I grew up, like so many kids, being forced to go to Hebrew school. And I never understood what the point was. It all felt very empty to me and very devoid of spirituality. And so I fled the Jewish religion at a very deep level. And even when I started having psychedelic experiences, I always perceived that there was like tension between this vast spiritual life that I was cultivating and the Jewish religion. And then I eventually, like in the last few years, found some of the writings of Madison Margolin, an amazing writer and the co-founder of Double Blind. And of course, her father, Bruce, was a friend of Ram Dass's and went on at least one pilgrimage back to India. And Madison was, sort of tackling this question from the perspective of her own identity. Why are all these Jews leaving Judaism and going to India? Is there a place for these kind of profound spiritual experiences within the Jewish religion? And, like her conclusion and my own is yes. And where I live now in Venice, California, the rabbi who I go to for the high holidays and other holidays is like a psychedelic rabbi and talks about, his plant medicine experiences like through a Jewish lens. And it's really kind of been like integration in the truest sense. If you think of integration as meaning the kind of sewing together of disparate parts of yourself into a more balanced whole, I think psychedelics and Judaism have kind of have integrated now, and I can actually like feel a sense of Jewish identity for the first time. And it's interesting. I mean, I know that Ram Dass, I don't know about later in his life. You might, Jackie, whether he found a home within within Judaism for his spiritual life. And I remember his quote, when he was asked, like, are you Jewish? And he said, only on my parents' side. And that's a funny quote, but it also sort of struck me as him perceiving there to be this kind of divide between his spiritual self and his Jewish self.
If I remember correctly, he called himself a Buddhist Hindu.
Right, right.
So I've been asking you lots of questions, and we have lots of other people here who might have some questions. So I just want to invite anyone else out here who would like to ask Joshua a question. You can type it in the chat, and I can ask it. And we have a small enough group that if you want to ask directly, you can raise your virtual hand, but I'm going to ask that you keep it really succinct. And if it's going long, we might interrupt just so we can get to more questions. And while I'm, all right, Jeff, go for it. I'm going to ask you to unmute. There you are.
Hey, Joshua, thank you so much. This is brilliant. I'm just wondering if there's like common themes or common things you would do to help somebody that's having a bad experience. Just like I've personally just feel like whenever I've been with somebody like that, just helping them ease, like see how it's something beautiful. But I'm just curious, like what advice you might have.
Yeah, such a great question. And, the first thing I just want to say is, the notion of calling an experience bad is one that we, tend to move away from. People can be having difficult experiences. And of course, those difficult experiences can be opportunities to grow. I think, I would come back to the Ram Dass phrase, be a loving rock, right? What does it mean to be a loving rock for someone? And I think there are ways, especially over the phone, I mean, in person too, but it's so powerful over the phone as well, to create a sense of trust and security for the person. And so that can be, often that starts with, just, sharing with the person that you'll be happy to be there with them as long as they like. And because I think so often people are alone and terrified and they feel like it's never going to end. And so just to hear that you'll be with them for as long as they need can be so healing. And I often just think, active listening is such a powerful way to demonstrate that being of a loving rock, right? It often starts with just showing that you understand and that you're witnessing what the person is experiencing. You sound so scared right now. You sound so terrified, and I hear you. I know that this can be so terrifying. Just that. Providing that experience of being seen and understood is so radically transformative for people. And I think another thing too is, I think this is sort of another aspect of being a loving rock, is communicating that it's okay not to be okay, that all emotions are welcome. I think in my opinion, a misconception of like so-called risk reduction or harm reduction work, which is not a term I like at all in the psychedelic context, is that like we de-escalate, that our goal is to de-escalate you. And who wants to be de-escalated, right? That's another way of saying that there's a set of emotions you're experiencing, and we want to take you from those emotions and move you to a space where you're feeling better emotions. And that strikes me as deeply problematic. Who are we to say which emotions a person should or shouldn't be feeling? And so to create a space for someone where all emotions are okay, including emotions of terror, emotions of shame and humiliation, for it to be witnessed with compassion and love, I think is radically transformative for people, especially in a psychedelic context where they may be experiencing parts of themselves for the first time ever, right? The shadow may be emerging. And so to communicate with the fullness of your presence, that whatever is arising is okay, is just so transformative, because it may be the first time ever that part of that person is being witnessed.
I love this so much. Absolutely, 100%. And there's this piece, I'm going to hijack the questions for a second, because there's this piece that I keep coming back to, which is the importance of community. and connection. And you were just talking about the importance of connection in just like the one-on-one. And I'm curious if there's something in the Fireside project that also has that like sense of community, of coming back together.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think community is the bedrock of the work that we do, and it's the bedrock for so much. I mean, we could go on about that, but I mean, at Fireside in particular, it is a community of volunteers. Every shift has 3 to 5 volunteers, which is a mini community. There's a supervisor on every shift that is holding space for the volunteers. We talk about nesting containers within Fireside Project. We have, supervisors creating a container for volunteers. The training manager creates a container for the supervisors, and so forth. And so I think the more interwoven that community is, the more, at a minimum, the more resilient each person is, but also the more you learn and the more fun it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's a couple questions, logistic questions in the chat that I'm just going to ask. And one is what I asked earlier. Do you provide support for integration afterward or just during the experience?
Yeah, so the support line does provide integration support. So we say whether the trip happened days or decades ago. And then we also have an amazing coaching service that we created that does provide long-term support for preparation and integration. And actually, all of our coaches are folks who have spent at least a year volunteering on our support line. And then at the end, if we have space, we'll hire them. And, there's incredible community within the coaches as well. We have an incredible clinical psychologist who oversees all of our coaches and provides weekly supervision. And so it's this beautiful opportunity to learn and grow with other coaches under the supervision of a really incredible teacher.
Looking at the chat, you might have a few volunteers after this call showing up.
We actually are the volunteer applications are open now.
Oh, perfect.
I'll put a link in the...
Yeah. You talked a little bit about the training process, which is what someone asked. And then Autumn asks, approximately how many support calls come in on a typical day?
We're having about... I just put the link. We're having about 1,000 calls a month now. So you could kind of break it down.
Quite a few. And then someone asks, about your transition and the transition of going from a law career to this path of service, and any fear or trepidation you had on that journey. They're exploring a similar question themselves. So any advice you might have?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is, I had felt like I'd been forced into a career as a lawyer. With traditional Jewish parents, my 2 options were doctor and lawyer. And when I almost passed out dissecting a worm in 6th grade, it became clear that lawyer was the only path for me. And so I think as I got older and, continued to cultivate a better sense of self, it became clear that practicing law was not fitting me as well as I would like for a career to, and so it just sort of happened in a very organic way. I just kind of followed my curiosity and my passion. So it started off with the support line, and then it became a very natural transition to basically take one thing that I loved, which was support lines, and combine it with another thing that I loved, which was psychedelics. And so it was like fairly, that progression was fairly natural, but I also felt like my path of being a lawyer has always felt very cognitive, like very driven by what I should do and very in the mind. Whereas the creation of Fireside Project and this career transition has always felt like a trust fall with the universe. And my experience has been like the deeper I trust, the more that trust is honored and held by the universe.
Oh, I love that. The trust fall. Let's see. Okay. Yeah.
I see a few that we haven't. Should I just answer some of that?
If I missed it, go for it.
Are there only volunteers working at Fireside or also therapists? Are you hiring? So yes, we're hiring volunteers. I just put the link at the bottom. So the folks on the support line are a range of things. Some are therapists, some are nurses and social workers and so forth. Now, when they're on the support line, they're acting not in their clinical capacity, of course, but it's a really diverse group of volunteers. And I think, if what you want to do is provide psychedelic support in your career in whatever way, I don't think there's a better way to get experience than at Fireside. It's a 1-year volunteer commitment. So you have to work the same 4-hour shift every week for about a year. So it's roughly 200 hours. And I don't know of any richer experiential training program that exists. And part of what's so cool about it is, as I said, you are on shift with other volunteers. And so you're observing other folks take calls. And so in addition to your own calls, you're also observing others. And you can, even when you're observing someone else's call, you can still kind of feel within yourself what may be activated. And so I think it really is this opportunity over the course of a year to identify what are your growth edges and how can you cultivate space around your triggers.
One of the things that comes up when we talk about these spaces, there's so many conversations happening. And as psychedelics move more into the mainstream, it's really through the mental health space and lens quite often. And there can be this tension between like clinical language and sort of the more spiritual or mystical nature of the experiences themselves. And so I'm curious what you see come up through the calls that come in, and how they end up being framed. Is it mostly through mental health? Is it through spiritual language? How do you do that with people?
And I think one of the things that's so interesting about psychedelics is how they just blur everything. They blur the lines between like what is spiritual and religious and clinical and medical. It all just gets blurred together. What's the line between like healing and transformation? So what we really try to do is meet people where they are. And so you do see like just a huge range of ways that people show up. But I mean, often when people are taking like a higher dose of psychedelics, the frame tends to be more around, transformational spiritual language than it does about like clinical language. But I think one of the things that I really love about not non-clinical support is that it in some ways is a better fit for can be a better fit for the psychedelic experience, the vastness of the experience, than like a traditional clinical model. I know that people go to therapists not necessarily to cure a specific DSM disorder, but at least through an insurance lens, that's why people go to therapists to have a particular clinical disorder and the symptoms reduced. Whereas I think like non-clinical support, there's just space for a lot more vastness, and there's there's not really any tension between the sorts of like non-human experiences or non-ordinary states of consciousness experiences and like any kind of traditional model, because we don't have a traditional model for the type of psychedelic support that we provide.
And that brings me to this peer-to-peer model feels really important, this power with each other rather than power over under, as Ram Dass used to talk about. And I'm just curious how you see it hopefully maybe shaping the future of the world of psychedelics.
Oh, yeah. I have very strong views about this. I mean, for psychedelics to reach their full potential, there just have to be more accepted forms of support than psychotherapy. I think psychotherapy is amazing for some people some of the time, but it's not scalable. Some people don't want it because they have associations with it. It may not be accessible and so forth. And so for me, one of the most pressing questions in the field is, what does the continuum of care look like? Should psychotherapy be part of that continuum? Absolutely. And there need to be so many other forms of support. And so I think like kind of a corollary question that's really interesting is, who needs what forms of support and for how long and at what points in their healing journey? But I think like non-clinical forms of support, group integration. I mean, I think there's so many different ways that support can be provided, as well as just in the community. How can we learn to hold each other up better? But I think it's a major problem if the way that we're thinking about the delivery of care in the psychedelic field is just exclusively through the lens of psychotherapy.
Definitely agree with that. David asks, what about psychedelics assisted meditation, like psychedelic experiences supporting a meditation practice? Any thoughts or insights on that?
Sounds awesome to me.
I know, right?
I mean, I know that after psychedelic experiences, my own meditation practice tends to be really supercharged. And I know there have been like interesting studies out of Hopkins kind of showing that, people who have a guided meditation practice after a psilocybin journey the benefits tend to last longer. So, I think for me, the insights that I have on psychedelics are all just totally overlapping with, what happens with it. All just feels like the same thing to me.
Yeah. I'd love to hear you talk more about integration and various tools that your coaches might be using or you see people using to great benefit.
Wow. That's a big question.
It is.
And I was just looking at the list, and I actually think that I don't know if Jacob is still here, but the incredible therapist who I mentioned who oversees Fireside's coaching program was just here a moment ago. I guess I just think of integration less as like what tools to use as more of just a mindset. Like, how can you make space for what happened during the experience? How can you continue to remain open to the lessons unfolding? And so I like, yes, there, like, I think the way what that looks like can vary person to person over time. I mean, for some people, it's, meditation or dance or journaling or art or conversations with certain types of people. But I think it's less about the specific things that you do and more about how can you kind of keep the light, the sort of flame from the psychedelic experience burning, and how can you create the space in your life so that you can be open to continuing to grow and heal. Yeah.
Leslie writes in the chat, she says, the ceremony of daily life. I like that.
Totally. And of course, hiring a Fireside certified psychedelic coach is a great.
Absolutely.
I saw another question earlier. Is this service performed in person? Does the relationship end at the end of the trip? And what is the training process? So it's all virtual. We offer support by phone and text message on the support line. Coaching is done by Zoom. Does the relationship end at the end of the trip? On the support line, yes, it does. Although we can invite people to call back whenever they'd like, including when the volunteer who supported them is next available, like on the volunteer's next shift. And for the training process, well, so, I mean, we see the time on the support line as a full year of training. And before people can take calls, there's roughly a 50-hour upfront training. So the next one is, we have 2 live training days, which are coming up on January 10th and 24th. And then there are a series of self-paced learnings that people go through at different times, as well as some shadow shifts and one-on-one meetings with supervisors. So it's a pretty rigorous process. And then, of course, once you're on shift and taking calls, all of the calls are observed by a supervisor. And when you're starting off, like literally every one of your calls is observed by a supervisor. So it's, I mean, to me, like, I think like almost with anything, the best way to learn is by learning some principles, by implementing those principles, and then by getting supervision by someone who's observing you implement those principles. And so I think we try to offer all three in balance with each other.
Sounds like a really unique and potent training, really robust, very exciting.
Yeah, I think it's pretty good.
Because you actually get to sit with people during it. I love this. So what's next? What are you excited about for Fireside next? What's on the horizon?
That's a good question. Well, I mean, for one thing, we only have 10 to 12,000 calls per year. I would like to get us up to 1 million or more. When you look at other support lines, other national support lines like the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, I read is going to have something like 7 million calls this year, which is an utter tragedy that a suicide hotline is used so much. But I think, like, from an awareness standpoint, people just know that for suicidality, you call 988. And so I think for Fireside, we want to get to that same level of awareness. I saw some data recently from SAMHSA that 10 million people last year alone admitted to taking psychedelics. That's a pretty staggering number. I think that number is only going to continue to increase, and upwards of 90% of psychedelic use is always going to happen, outside of a clinical context. And so I think my goal is to really like break through with Fireside so that everyone is aware of the support line and aware of the coaching program. I'm also excited about a study that we're about to start with Harvard Medical School and Massachusetts General Hospital that looks at how coaching, or if coaching integrates into like a rigorous clinical context at a ketamine clinic. So we were talking earlier about like the continuum of care. Like a part of our kind of hypothesis is that coaching can integrate into a clinical context and can be like a lower cost, high impact way to help people have better outcomes. And so we're lucky enough to be starting this study with pretty soon with them. So I'm excited to see how that goes and then expanding it.
I'm excited to see how that goes as well. I think that's a really important piece. And I again, similar to you, want people to just have this in their background knowledge, because I know my world went into lots of underground scenes where people were just sort of blown open and left to their own devices. And so to know that there's a safe place they can go and talk about their experience just makes me feel safer around the world of psychedelics as it unfolds into the months and years to come.
Totally. I mean, that's kind of the number one thing we hear from people when they find out that we exist is, I wish I'd had Fireside when. And it's also just, I think it is connection in its purest form. The connection you take this leap of faith, often in the middle of the night, to call a phone number, and what you're greeted with is someone who literally just wants to be fully present for you, and to create a safe container for you to hopefully turn towards your experience with curiosity and compassion. And what's fascinating, what I find fascinating, is there's this, on the topic of magic, there's this magic that happens where the right caller just always seems to be connected to the right volunteer. And I remember, I don't take calls really anymore on the support line, but I remember early on I was, and this call came in from this guy who was in an ayahuasca ceremony. The shaman had abandoned the ceremony, claiming that the medicine didn't work, but he was wrong about that. And the caller somehow knew about us and called, and he was in a highly activated state because he had been abandoned by his own family, and so the shaman's abandonment had triggered that. And during the 2-hour conversation, he was sharing with me that, like, it was becoming clearer and clearer to him that the greatest fear in his life was to be alone. And as he was starting to describe this to me, I was thinking to myself, well, this is my greatest fear in life. And it happened very quickly that we sort of had this pooled experience of consciousness, and I could feel the ayahuasca reach up through the phone and grab me. Like, there was this very palpable moment, and I was just thinking to myself, like, holy shit, I created this support line and happened to answer the phone when this guy called, and he's navigating the very thing that I've spent my life navigating. And it was quite powerful.
The serendipities, for lack of a better word, that often happens in these non-ordinary states is mind-blowing. And it just keeps coming back to, like, consciousness is not localized. Like, I'm convinced more and more consciousness is not localized.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. There's 2 quick questions. One is, how are you funded?
Mm-hmm.
By Ned, yeah.
Philanthropy. The coaching program hopefully will bring in revenue at some point. That is a paid service, but we're very, very lucky to have some philanthropists who have kept us going. And eventually we would like to receive public funding. I mean, we did a study with UCSF and Mount Sinai that showed that we reduced ER visits, and we did that study in the hope of qualifying for public funding eventually, but that requires a functioning government, which we don't have right now.
So I'll ask John's question. If you're not based in America, can you still use the service?
So that's a good question. Technically, it's for people in the United States, and we accept WhatsApp calls.
Great. So looking at our time, I want to segue into our breakout rooms, but I want to ask one last question, which is, what gives you hope about where the movement is headed?
That's a beautiful question. I think the medicines themselves are what give me the greatest hope, that we co-evolved as creatures, as humans, with these powerful medicines, and it's a miracle that our brains have the capacity to or have this keyhole that these particular medicines can unlock. And whenever I feel cynical about the psychedelic field, which is most hours of most days, I always try to just come back to the fact that these medicines exist and these experiences exist, and that like, really, we are all one consciousness and one interconnected sentience. And I think these medicines can help us remember that, and that gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah. I don't want to end on it, but I am curious what's the cynical pieces?
let's see. It turns out that if you have narcissistic tendencies and you take a lot of psychedelics, then you'll become narcissistic and self-righteous, and that's a terrible combination. And there's just a lot of rampant, unchecked narcissism in the field. There's a lot of money to be made potentially in the field, and so that draws in a certain type of person. Yeah, those would be two of the big ones.
Yeah, I feel that too. And luckily there's projects like this. And to me, I keep coming back to, I don't know if this is true or not, if I just made this up, that if a lot of these molecules were used in traditional cultures, there would have been a community around you that would help you live into insights and be in the dignity of what you learned. And I'm just curious if there's a place for community for us in a similar way that helps us live into those insights.
Absolutely. I mean, I think ideally, especially in indigenous cultures, everyone just supports everyone. That like integration isn't a discrete process from the rest of your life. It's just living and being in community. So I think there's a lot of inspiration that we can draw from that. Yeah. Community is always the answer.
Seems like it. There's so many more questions I'd like to ask it, but it's just so wonderful to have you. It's so great to learn more about Fireside Project and what you're doing and how Ram Dass influenced so much of it. One of the things that I'm constantly shocked by is how he has tendrils still in all these different realms, and to hear it be part of this as well in the service piece and learning how to be a presence is really inspiring. I think we can all be reminded to do that more and more.
Well, it was such a delight and truly a profound honor to be able to speak to all of you, with all of you today.